Excerpt from A Tramp Abroad. Okay, this is a literary excerpt, nonfiction. It's by Mark Twain. And it looks to be a first-person narrative. I see the various I's throughout. And the paragraphs, we might note, are very long, unlike some of the passages on the SHSAT reading that are now 2-sentence paragraphs. So this is the opposite extreme. Let's begin reading. Now and then, while we rested, we watched the laborious ant at his work. I found nothing new in him, certainly nothing to change my opinion of him. It seems to me that in the matter of intellect, the ant must be a strangely overrated bird. During many summers now I've watched him when I ought to have been in better business, and I've not yet come across a living ant that seemed to have any more sense than a dead one. I refer to the ordinary ant, of course. I have no experience of those wonderful Swiss and African ones which vote, keep drilled armies, and dispute about religion. Those particular ants may be all the naturalist paints them. But I am persuaded the average ant is a sham. So far, Mark Twain doesn't seem to have a lot of respect for ants, the ordinary ones at least. I admit his industry, of course. He is the hardest working creature in the world when anyone is looking. But his leather-headedness is the point I make against him. He goes out foraging, he makes a capture, and then what does he do? Go home? ? No, he goes anywhere but home. He doesn't know where home is. His home may only be 3 feet away. No matter, he can't find it. He makes his capture, as I have said. It is generally something which can be no sort of use to himself or anybody else. It is usually 7 times bigger than it ought to be. He hunts out the awkwardest place to take it, hold it. He lifts it bodily up in the air by main force and starts, not toward home, but in the opposite direction. Not calmly and wisely, but with a frantic haste, which is wasteful of his strength. He fetches up against a pebble, and instead of going around it, he climbs over it backwards, dragging his body up after him, tumbles on the other side, jumps up in a passion, kicks off the dust, moistens his hands, grabs his property viciously, yanks it this way, and then shoves it ahead of him in a moment, turns tail and lugs it after him another moment, gets madder and madder, then presently hoists it into the air, and goes tearing away in an entirely new direction, comes to a weed. It never occurs to him to go around it. No. Notice all the semicolons. This whole paragraph is essentially one sentence, one very long sentence. No, he must climb it, and he does climb it, dragging his worthless property to the top, which is a bright thing to do, as it would be for me to carry a sack of flour from Heidelberg to Paris by way of Strasbourg steeple. When he gets up there, he finds that it is not the place, takes a curious glance at the scenery, and either climbs down again or tumbles down, starts off once more, as usual, in a new direction. At the end of half an hour, he fetches up within 6 inches of the place he started from, and lays his burden down. Meantime, he has been all over the ground for 2 yards around, and climbed all the weeds and pebbles he came across. Now he wipes the sweat from his brows, strokes his lips, and then marches aimlessly off. Finally stops to rest, and a friend comes along. Okay, this mostly one sentence connected by semicolons is essentially pointing out all the crazy things this ant does. It's almost Twain is making fun of the ant. He's just making ridiculous decisions that make no sense. He's taking whatever his capture is, leaf, whatever, everywhere except where it needs to go. And then he gives up and he starts again, not even knowing it was the leaf he had before, or whatever it was. Evidently, the friend remarks that a last year's grasshopper leg is a very noble acquisition and inquires where he got it. Okay, so it's not a leaf, it was a grasshopper leg. Evidently, the proprietor does not remember exactly where he did get it. The proprietor is that original ant who's kind of, let's face it, kind of dumb, but thinks he got it around here somewhere. Evidently, the friend contracts to help him freight it home. Then, when the judgment is particularly antic, pun not intentional, they take hold of opposite ends of that grasshopper leg and begin to tug with all their might in opposite directions. So now they're fighting over the leg. Presently they take a rest and confer together. They decide that something is wrong. They can't make out what. Then they go at it again just as before. Fighting over the leg, same result. Mutual recriminations follow. Evidently each accuses the other of being an obstructionist. They warm up and the dispute ends in a fight. They lock themselves together and chew each other's jaws for a while. Then they roll and tumble on the ground until one loses a horn or a leg and has to haul off for repairs. They make up and go to work again in the same old and same way. But the crippled ant is at a disadvantage. Tug as he may, the other one drags off the body and him at the end of it. Instead of giving up, he hangs on, that's the ant being dragged, and gets his shins bruised against every obstruction that comes in the way. By and by, when the grasshopper leg has been dragged all over the same old ground once more, it is finally dumped at about the spot where it originally lay. The two perspiring ants inspect it thoughtfully and decide that dry grasshopper legs, they're poor sort of property after all. And then each starts off in a different direction to see if he can't find an old nail or something else that is heavy enough to afford entertainment and at the same time valueless enough to make it an ant want to own it. So he gives a lot of details and examples of the fun he has with one ant, then the fun and ridiculous behavior of the two ants together. They end up fighting each other. And finally, paragraph 4. Let's do. Science has recently discovered that the ant does not lay up anything for winter use. That's interesting. He does not work except when people are looking, and only then when the observer has a green naturalistic look and seems to be taking notes. This amounts to deception and will injure him for the Sunday schools. He has not judgment enough to know what is good to eat from what isn't. This amounts to ignorance and will impair the world's respect for him. He cannot stroll around a stump and find his way home again. This amounts to idiocy. And once damaging fact is established, thoughtful people will cease to look up to him. It is strange beyond comprehension that so manifest a humbug as the ant has been able to fool so many nations and keep it up so many ages without being found out. Okay, there is a reference from the ant to the nations, so there might be a figurative reference to an analogy of the ant and his behavior and the behavior of nations. Might be true here. I don't know enough about it to say. Probably we're not going to get into that because it's a very subtle reference in the text. But we do have a statement here. The ant is a sham. We have a full paragraph describing the crazy evidence that shows an ant is a sham, ultimately an idiot. And then we see two ants together, that they're equally idiots. And then finally, just the summary notes that the ants don't lay up things for the winter. The judgment of people on ants is going to be impaired. Let's take a look at the questions.